Lu Xun. An intelligent individual and devout Confucianist who served the Kingdom of Wu as a military general and also as a politician. He is most well known for dealing a massive blow to the Shu kingdom during the Battle of Yiling, where he scored a victory over Liu Bei, who had led his army to avenge Guan Yu's death and recapture Jing province. Things went really well for Lu Xun after this accomplishment, as he earned favour with his lord Sun Quan and was bestowed many gifts and titles. In his later life, his attempts to defuse a growing power struggle between Sun Quan's third and fourth sons resulted in him falling out of favour with Sun Quan, so his elder years were filled with much stress and angst. Lu Xun was born into a very wealthy clan in the year 183 in Wu Commandery, as the Lu clan was one of the four most prominent families in China at that time. Lu Xun had two grandfathers who were once officials for the Han government, with his clan also including the official and scholar Lu Ji, the mentor to Liu Bei and Gong Sun Zan. They are not to be confused with the other Lu clans, which included Lu Meng and Lu Bu, or Lu Su. As Lu Xun was an orphan, his grandfather and administrator of Lujiang Commandery, Lu Kang, took him in and raised him until he was 11 years old. As Lu Kang was a Han loyalist and saw the self-proclaimed emperor Houhanshu as a traitor, he refused when Houhanshu asked him for supplies, so the latter ordered an army led by Sun Ce to capture Lujiang Commandery. Before the fighting commenced, Lu Xun was carted off back to Wu Commandery. Then, in the year 195, after Lu Kang's death, he was honoured as the new head of the family at the age of 15, over Lu Kang's legitimate son Lu Ji, who was only 10 at the time. 5 years later, Lu Xun came to serve as an official under Sun Quan, the younger brother of Sun Ce, the man who had caused the death of his grandfather. Lu Xun excelled in his work and quickly rose from a minor officer up to a foreman until he held a county official position. Here he made two great contributions to his state. Years of drought had plagued the lands, so Lu Xun opened up the food storehouses to the public and fed them well, whilst also encouraging agriculture work to be carried out. Also, in Wu, Kuaji and Danyang commanderies, many common folk were evading the Han conscription and taxes, so Lu Xun had them tracked down and rehoused, which resulted in more recruits for the army and workers for the fields. Before long, Sun Quan led his troops to quell the various bandits that plagued the region, as any hopes of stability for Wu would require their pacification. Lu Xun personally formed a unit to lead through the treacherous terrain in Kuaji Commandery, whereafter he put down the bandit leader Pan Lin and increased his unit's troops by 2,000. He marched his emboldened unit into Poyang County and defeated another bandit leader named Yu Tu. He was then commissioned as a military officer as colonel who established his might and garrisoned at Li Pu County. Cao Cao had enlisted the aid of a bandit leader named Fei Zhan, who was tasked with inciting the Shan tribes to raid Sun Quan's towns and cities. Sun Quan sent Lu Xun to deal with Fei Zhan, and even though his Wu army was much smaller, Lu Xun was able to come out victorious. He spread out his soldiers, placing the drummers in the valleys, and had his troops prepare more banners and flags, which created an illusion of a much larger army. Then, only a reasonable engagement between the two forces was needed to cause Fei Zhan to panic and surrender. After the battle was won, Lu Xun spent some time travelling the area, recruiting soldiers and drafting workers. He was able to draft over 10,000 men and then garrisoned at Wu Hu. Chun Yu Shi, the administrator of Kuaji Commandery, accused Lu Xun of oppressing the people and disturbing the peace, so Lu was summoned by Sun Quan to explain himself. Lu Xun didn't even try to defend himself, and instead he praised Chun Yu Shi's concern for the common people's well-being by saying, "Chun Yu Shi was concerned about the people's welfare when he made accusations against me. If I rebuked him, I'll be violating my principles. This is something I won't do." Sun Quan replied with, "This is something a person with good morals will do, and something which ordinary people aren't capable of doing." In the year 219, Lu Meng deceived Guan Yu as he marched for Fan Castle by feigning an illness, then leaving his post on the front line to return to the capital for medical treatment. Guan Yu then lowered his concerns about the Shu-Wu border and ordered even more soldiers from Jing to join in the assault against Wei. Upon arriving at the capital and meeting with Sun Quan, who was already in on the plan, Lu Meng picked Lu Xun to be his replacement, as whilst he was talented and capable, Lu Xun was not well known at this point, so Guan Yu would not consider him a threat, or become alerted. Lu Xun, who was unaware of Lu Meng's ruse, pointed out to him that now would be a good time to invade Jing, as Guan Yu's guard would be lowered. Lu Meng reinforced the fact that he was ill, but also agreed with Lu Xun, but then noted it would still be difficult to overcome Guan Yu. Lu Xun then made his way to replace Lu Meng's post at Lu Shui Lake, where he unintentionally contributed to Lu Meng's strategy in the form of a couple letters that he wrote to Guan Yu. He expressed his awe and excitement over having Guan Yu as a neighbour, whilst praising his recent victories against their mutual enemy Wei. Within the letters, he praised Guan Yu's leadership, whilst downplaying his own capabilities, describing himself as negligent and slow. These letters reinforced Guan Yu's judgment of Lu Xun as a simple man, which helped keep Jing province weak and free of Shu's armies. Lu Meng's invasion of Jing went underway, where he disguised his troops as civilians, sailed across the river, disabled the Shu watchtowers along the border, and then hastily conquered the major cities within Jing province. After Guan Yu's execution, Lu Xun mustered his men to secure Wu's dominance over southern Jing. He granted Li Yi and Shi Ji 3,000 troops to engage Zhang Yan and Chen Fang, whereafter the two Wu generals continued on and captured Fangling Commandery and Nanxing County. This incited two influential men from the area to rally thousands of militia to oppose Lu Xun, but they were countered by Shi Ji at Lu Xun's command. The influential men eventually fled to Shu, where Liu Bei appointed them as military officers, although one of them was later enticed by Lu Xun to join Wu. In January of 221, the remaining officials and tribal chiefs of the region surrendered to Lu Xun, who had official gold, silver and bronze seals carved and distributed among them. During the time that Lu Xun was pacifying southern Jing in 220, Cao Cao passed away, 1 month after Guan Yu was executed. It took only 8 months until Emperor Qian abdicated his throne to Cao Pi, who then became the first emperor of the state of Wei, hereafter replacing the Han dynasty. A few months later, in 221, Liu Bei vowed to continue on the Han Empire's legacy and declared himself as its emperor, although to avoid confusion, it was historically recorded as Shu Han or Shu. Sun Quan's prior agreement with Cao Cao was then upheld as he pledged allegiance to Wei, with Wu becoming its vassal, and was granted the title King of Wu by Cao Pi. Sun Quan was extremely pleased with Lu Xun's efforts during the war, as by now his actions had led to either the death, capture, or recruitment of tens of thousands of men. Just after Jing was occupied, Lu Xun was granted an administrator role, promoted, and then enfeoffed as a village marquis. Then again, after his victories in southern Jing, he was promoted twice, and his marquis status was increased to that of a county level. Sun Quan fast-tracked the legality of these promotions by ordering Lu Fan to recommend Lu Xun as a Maokai, and then to backdate Lu Xun's service record by saying that he was previously a personal assistant to the Sun family. Upon receiving these titles, Lu Xun recommended to Sun Quan that they groom and employ the talented and educated men from southern Jing to ensure a strong foundation for their infrastructure, whilst also attracting more people to their culture. In 222, Liu Bei personally led tens of thousands of men against the will of his advisors to recapture Jing province via land and water. Liu Bei was extremely distraught during this time, as not only had he lost his beloved general Guan Yu, but also his other favoured general Zhang Fei had been murdered just a few months ago. Sun Quan put Lu Xun in charge of the defence force and was given 50,000 men to command, with Sun Huan, Xu Cheng, Han Dang, Song Xian, Pan Jiang and Zhu Ran as subordinate officers. Sun Huan led a separate force to engage the Shu vanguard Zhang Nan at Yidao, but he became trapped, so requested reinforcements from Lu Xun, who denied his request. Lu Xun's subordinates urged him to save Sun Huan as he was a relative of their lord, but Lu Xun stated that Sun Huan's men, base and supplies are all sufficient, and that once his own plans are in motion, the siege on him will automatically be lifted. Liu Bei arrived on the outskirts of Yiling with a similar sized force, slightly bolstered by the local tribal warriors he had enlisted from the mountains, where he set up his camps and began to lay siege to the area. Fu Rong, Liu Xun, Zhao Rong, Fu Guang and Feng Shi were amongst the Shu ranks, with Wu Ban being given the order to camp closer to the Wu army in order to taunt them into attacking. The Wu generals were eager to fight and wanted to engage Liu Bei as soon as he arrived on the battlefield, but Lu Xun denied them, as he wanted to wait for a change in the situation. He figured that an engagement under these circumstances could yield only small results, but could also end in tragedy, and it wasn't worth the risk. He then ignored the taunts of Wu Ban, seeing through the enemy's obvious ploy, but his own officers began to think Lu Xun feared the Shu army, so they had little faith in his capabilities. Around 6 months had passed until Liu Bei pulled 8,000 ambush troops from the mountains and bolstered his various camps' defences. Lu Xun pointed this out to his officers as the reason why he didn't listen to them earlier before writing a letter to Sun Quan. He reinforced Sun Quan's worries by highlighting his understanding of how strategically important Yiling is to Jing province, as it is straightforward to conquer and from it you can easily seize all of Jing. Lu Xun was surprised when Liu Bei abandoned his boats for an all-out land attack. This gave him confidence in his own inexperienced abilities in getting a win over Liu Bei, who at this point had lost more battles than he had won in his career. He hoped that Sun Quan's mind would be at ease after reading these words. By now, Liu Bei's most important camps were tightly guarded, and he had erected even more that were closer to the Wu army. This caused the Wu officers to criticise Lu Xun for missing their opportunity earlier, as now they had been locked in a stalemate for 8 months and things looked worse than ever. As many of Lu Xun's subordinates were veterans who once served under Sun Ce, or relatives of the Sun family, they felt no respect towards Lu Xun's authority, so he placed his sword on a desk and spoke plainly with them about it. He expressed how Cao Cao himself feared Liu Bei and how he himself now has an important fight on his hands. He pointed out the generosity they have each received from the state, and that now is the time to repay it. He scolded them for behaving how they are, whilst urging them to cooperate harmoniously. Lu went on to admit how he himself is merely a scholar, but has been tasked with a great responsibility from their lord. He stated that it's a humiliating position for him to be in, which I'm sure they could all relate to, as he went on to claim how he could endure it to fulfill a greater task. Lu Xun then pointed out how Liu Bei's army was ready for a fight, focused and high in morale in the early stages. Now that they have run out of ideas and are merely loafing around, it's a good time to launch a multi-pronged attack against them. He selected a camp and then launched an attack against it, but failed to capture it. I presume he either tested its defences or weakened it, but either way his subordinates complained to him that their men are dying for no reason. So he ordered every man to take a bundle of straw with them for their next attack, where they started a fire within the Shu camp. Once the flames were lit, Lu Xun led his army in an all-out attack against the Shu forces, which threw them into complete disarray and scattered them all over. During the chaos, Zhang Nan, Feng Shi, Shamok and Fu Rong were all killed in action. In total, over 40 Shu camps were destroyed by Lu Xun's grand charge. Many minor Shu officers that were left behind became surrounded and surrendered to Wu, whilst Liu Bei led the majority of his army through the Manan hills. But the mass of Shu soldiers' heavy footsteps set off landslides which then led to thousands more being injured. Liu Bei resorted to ordering his men to remove their armour, then set it alight and create a blockade of sorts to prevent the enemy from pursuing. By the time Liu Bei reached the relative safety of Baidi Castle, he had lost every boat, every weapon or piece of armour, and all of his food supplies to the Wu forces. Not to mention the massive dead Shu soldiers that blocked up the river enough to alter its flow. His frustration and fury was almost incomprehensible as he exclaimed, "Is it not the will of the heaven that I must be humiliated by Lu Xun?" Sun Huan caught up with Lu Xun after the battle and said, "Earlier on, I was indeed very resentful when you refused to help me. But now, after the victory, I see you have your own way of doing things." It didn't take long for the Wu officers to change their opinion of Lu Xun after this conflict, as his strategies and the manner in which he stayed true to himself impressed them all very much. The way that the Wu officers originally acted towards Lu Xun soon reached Sun Quan's ears, who questioned why Lu Xun didn't report any of these incidents. Lu Xun explained that because the Wu officers were either able, trustworthy, or have earned past deeds, the state can rely on them to achieve its goals, and he wouldn't want to jeopardize their potential. Lu Xun admitted to being weak and cowardly to Sun Quan, but stated that he wanted to work through the disagreements with his officers for the common good of their state before reporting it to a higher chain of command. Sun Quan was overjoyed at this, then promoted Lu Xun as the general who assists the state, made the governor of Jing province, and became the Marquis of Jiangling. As Liu Bei was all but defeated, Xu Cheng, Pan Zhang, Song Xian, and many others suggested to Sun Quan to order an attack into Baidi Cheng, but he was unsure, so asked Lu Xun for his thoughts. Lu Xun favoured returning home to Wu, as he believed Tao Pi was massing his armies under the guise of helping Wu, but actually wanted to conquer it. Thankfully for Sun Quan, he took Lu Xun's advice, as Tao Pi did indeed launch a three-pronged attack into Wu, after Sun Quan refused Tao Pi's request to send his son to go and live at the Wei capital. In the meantime, Zhu Geijin and Lu Xun both wrote letters to Liu Bei in attempts to secure peace, as Xu's armies hovered on the border of Jing with scouts and spies roaming within. Liu Bei had lost almost all of what little support he had to recapture Jing. Zhuge Liang, Li Yan, Liu Yan and Zhao Yun all strongly pushed Liu Bei to renew the Shu-Wu alliance. Eventually, Liu Bei agreed to not only renew the alliance, but also to coordinate a joint attack against Wei. Liu Bei asked Lu Xun for his advice on whether Xu's armies could conquer Jiangling, but Lu Xun warned against it and said, "If you do not consider carefully and plan to dispatch all of your remaining forces on another attack, you will lose even more of your forces." In the year 223, Liu Bei passed away, with Liu Shan succeeding him. Zhuge Liang then proceeded to take control of the situation as the new head of the Shu government, and started to rebuild the Shu-Wu alliance. During this diplomatic period, Lu Xun was given authority to write letters on Sun Quan's behalf. On top of this, any letter that Sun Quan wrote to Liu Shan or Zhuge Liang was first delivered to Lu Xun, so he could amend any mistakes or add necessary details. Lu Xun even had a duplicate of Sun Quan's official seal to stamp his lord's letters at his residence. 5 years passed until the year 228, when Sun Quan appointed Lu Xun as the Grand Chief Commander of 6 separate Wu armies to defend against an incoming Wei army led by Tao Xu. Sun Quan's plan to have the administrator of Poyang Commandery, Xiao Fang, pretend to switch sides to Wei was already in motion, which was used to lure the Wei army towards Wu. According to legend, Xiao Fang met with Tao Xu at a clearing near Xiting, and suggested that it's a good location to set up a camp, and then cut off a lock of his hair to prove his sincerity to Tao Xu, who then fell for his trick. Xia Kui thought Xiao Fang was acting suspicious, so he advised Tao Xu against it, who then ignored his advice and removed his military authority instead. When Tao Xu later caught wind of Xiao Fang's deception, he was also misled by Lu Xun's hidden troops into thinking that he had the larger army. On top of that, Tao Xu's Wei soldiers were well trained, so in an attempt to save himself embarrassment, he continued to march on anyway. Lu Xun was given a yellow ceremonial axe by Sun Quan to represent his role as head of the Wu army, and ordered all of his subjects to pay their respects to Lu Xun before he headed off to battle. Once at Xiting, Lu Xun divided his troops into 3, and personally led them from the centre of the formation, with Zhu Huan leading the troops on one flank and Xuan Kong leading the other. Lu Xun laid an ambush for Tao Xu, where all 3 armies displayed their true numbers and marched forward simultaneously, striking fear and confusion into their enemy. They scored a decisive victory against Tao Xu's men, who then turned to flee. Lu Xun's troops caught up with some Wei soldiers at Jiaxi, where they slaughtered 10,000 men and took all of their equipment. Xia Kui, who loyally continued his duties despite having his title removed, was expecting something like this to happen, and managed to aid Tao Xu in escaping the onslaught. When Lu Xun returned to Wuchang after the battle, he was gifted many treasures by Sun Quan, who ordered his servants to shield Lu Xun with his imperial parasol when he entered or left the palace. By this point, Lu Xun had received unprecedented honours from Sun Quan, then shortly after this he made his way to Yiling. A year later, in 229, Sun Quan officially established the state of Wu by declaring himself emperor, whereafter he promoted Lu Xun to 2 more positions before embarking on an inspection tour of Xianyi. Lu Xun was left at Wuchang with Sun Quan's children and instructed to aid his eldest son Sun Deng when it comes to military and civil affairs, whilst also overlooking all of these duties throughout Jing province and beyond. Upon arriving at Wuchang, Lu Xun discovered a shed outside the palace that Sun Quan's second son, Sun Lu, used for watching duck fights. Lu scorned him by saying, "Ma Kui, you should be spending your time reading classics and enriching your knowledge. Why are you doing this?" This shamed Sun Lu so much that he had the shed torn down right away. As Lu Xun continued to inspect the city, he discovered the colonel of trainee archers slacking off and messing around at camp with his men. Lu Xun reprimanded him and forced him and all of his soldiers to shave their heads as punishment. On a third occasion, Lu Xun went to see Shi Ji, who served with him in Sun Lu's residence, as he found out Shi Ji admired the teachings of Liu Yi regarding punishment before civility. Lu Xun criticized Liu Yi as distorting the ancient sage's writings and using manipulative, misleading wording to get his point across. Lu Xun emphasized to Yiling his duties within the palace and how he should promote benevolent and righteous moral values to those around him, and stated, ideas like Liu Yi's should never be discussed again. As Lu Xun continued his duties at the palace, he became burdened with thoughts of the capital and deep concern regarding the state of Wu. He wrote a letter to Sun Quan about the increased rate in crimes committed by officers and officials of their lands. He suggested that Sun Quan take an easy approach to punishing them, as the realm is yet to be united and they cannot afford to dismiss these talented men or their potential. He suggested that unless they had committed an unforgivable offence, they should be reinstated fully and allowed a chance to redeem themselves. Sun Quan made preparations to conquer the then legendary islands of Yizhu and Danzhou, which could have been modern-day Taiwan and Ryukyu, and he also sought to invade Zhuya. He wrote to Lu Xun seeking his advice on how to win on these campaigns, but Lu Xun advised against it. He noted that the people of Zhuya are barbaric and live in an extreme climate. The annual fog of the island causes puddles to be left on the floors inside, meaning the Wu soldiers may not be able to adapt and will probably get sick. Even with a victory, the troops cannot be replenished from the island. It is uncharted territory, so the losses will most likely outweigh the gains. He also brought up Sun Ce in the letter, noting how he managed to conquer a vast area of land with only a few men, fulfilling his duty of securing a base of operations. He added that it was Sun Quan's duty to build up Wu's infrastructure so it can last for generations, whilst pointing out that they're currently plagued with internal conflicts and many people still suffer, so war should be a final resort at this point. Sun Quan ignored this advice and launched his expeditions anyway. Danzhou could not even be located, while some sailors did manage to bring some Taiwanese aborigines back to Wu, but 90% of their fleet was lost in the voyage. Sun Quan led a 100,000-man strong army to invade Wei at Hefei in the year 234, but he suffered a great defeat. At the same time, he ordered Lu Xun and Zhu Geijin to attack Xiangyang. Lu Xun had sent a messenger earlier to Sun Quan, but he got captured by Wei forces on the return journey. The defeat at Hefei and the capture of the messenger meant that they stood little to no chance of victory against Wei here. Zhu Geijin panicked and wrote to Lu Xun regarding their retreat plan. Lu Xun didn't reply to the letter and instead ordered his men to plant vegetables whilst he played board games with his troops, completely disregarding their situation. This confused the Wei armies, who were already wary of Lu Xun's trickery and so didn't dare attack. Lu Xun feigned an attack into Xiangyang by positioning his army to lay siege, but he had Zhu Geijin secretly prepare boats for retreat this whole time. When Zhu Geijin arrived on the battlefield, Lu Xun kept up appearances of invading whilst he ordered his men to slowly and orderly march onto the boats and sailed home. The Wei officers still didn't dare make a move as they suspected the whole ordeal could be a trick. As they sailed back to Wu, the fleet stopped off at Bai Wei to supposedly go hunting, but Lu Xun secretly intended to raid the counties within Jiangxia Commandery instead. As the Wu army approached Xiyang, it caused the common folk to panic and rush through the city gates to the safety behind its walls. The mad panic made it difficult for the city guards to close the gates, so they resorted to cutting people down in order to seal it shut. Under Lu Xun's orders, thousands were either killed or taken prisoner to be resettled in Wu. He went to extra lengths to provide for his new citizens by forbidding his men from harassing them and providing new clothes and food for them. It's said many people were grateful towards Lu Xun and spoke of his acts of kindness, which drew two-way officers to come pledge their loyalty to him, as well as a tribal king. The historian Pei Shongji condemns Lu Xun's actions by stating his simple acts of kindness cannot ever compensate for the losses the people would have endured in a brutal massacre, and that the raid was totally uncalled for. He points out how it's the complete opposite of how Zhuge Liang treated the people in his northern expeditions. Across the border at Jiangxia, the administrator, Lu Shi, was on bad terms with Wen Ping's son, Wen Shu. As they were a constant nuisance for the Wu forces, Lu Xun devised a plan to use their enmity towards one another to his advantage. Chen Shu praised Lu Xun's trick to write a letter, which he purposefully left so Lu Shi's men would discover it. The letter was a fake reply, detailing Lu Xun's acceptance of Lu Shi's defection to the Wu side, and it pointed out how Lu Shi could not exist alongside Wen Shu. When Lu Shi learned of this letter, he sent his family to the capital, which made him look even more suspicious to his men, and he was eventually removed from office. Pei Shongji disagrees that this was a praiseworthy trick, although it was cunning. He states it is normal for border commanders to create problems for their enemies on the other side, out of their duty towards their state, not because of malicious intent, meaning Lu Shi's replacement is still going to act in the same way. In the year 237, Sun Quan became angered at Gong Sun Yuan, who broke his alliance with Wu and refused to send them any fine steeds, so he considered sailing all the way north to invade them. Lu Xun urgently wrote to Sun Quan insisting him not to be so foolish as to launch an invasion over such a long distance, nor to go against the advice of his ministers. Sun Quan eventually calmed down and heeded Lu Xun's advice to tolerate this minor setback for the betterment of Wu's future, after Lu Xun highlighted how it would leave them open to invasion. He also explained how the victories at Shi Ji, against Guan Yu, and at Yiling have strengthened Wu's reputation, giving them time to devise a plan to unify the land. He warned Sun Quan that acting rashly now could jeopardize all of their victories up till now. In the same year, Zhu Ji wrote a letter to Lu Xun asking for his opinion about recruiting troops from Poyang Commandery. Lu Xun didn't agree with the idea, as the locals from that area were restless and bound to start a rebellion. Lu Xun's advice wasn't even listened to by Zhu Ji, who then proceeded with his plan anyway, and as expected, the people rose up against him and had him killed. Not only that, but they also rallied people from the nearby commanderies of Yuzhang and Lu Jing to join in with their revolt. Lu Xun then had to deal with this situation and led his forces to pacify the three commanderies, whereafter he was able to draft 8,000 more men. A very corrupt official from Wu, named Lu Yi, had gotten away with scandalous behaviour for years now, as he liked to wrongly accuse his rivals, or those he disliked, of committing serious crimes, which often ended in their arrest or execution. Many officers tried to inform Sun Quan of Lu Yi's actions. Lu Xun, Bu Ji, and even Chuan's son Sun Deng all spoke up numerous times, but too many other minor officials would defend Lu Yi out of fear of him and convince Sun Quan otherwise. Things got so bad that Pan Zheng tried to take matters into his own hands by assassinating Lu Yi at a banquet, but the latter pretended to be sick as an excuse to not show up. Eventually the truth was discovered by Sun Quan, who wrote emotional letters to his officers blaming himself for allowing things to go on for so long, whilst also sincerely apologising to them. He asked Zhu Geijin, Bu Ji, Zhu Ran and Lu Dai on how they thought the system could be reformed, but they were quite disgruntled and excused themselves from answering him, as they were not civil officials like Lu Xun or Pan Zheng. Bu Ji went extra lengths to ensure the release of as many innocent officials that were imprisoned by Lu Yi, by writing letters in their defence. Even though Sun Quan didn't heed all of his advice, Bu Ji still managed to save many officials from peril. 2 officials came to visit Sun Quan to suggest increasing the tax on the people in order to increase government revenue, so Quan wrote to Lu Xun for his thoughts on the matter. Lu Xun disagreed completely, and thought the total opposite by saying, "A state's prosperity is due to its people's efforts and its revenue comes from the people as well." He believed it is difficult to make people strive for their best if they cannot even see the potential benefits of their labour, and that Sun Quan should show benevolence towards the people for now, then implement the changes in a few years' time. Guang, the Imperial Chancellor of Wu, passed away in the year 244, and Sun Quan chose Lu Xun to be his replacement. Lu Xun still held his responsibilities of Governor of Jing, Defender of the Capital, and Chief Overseer of Affairs in Wuchang, but was now also in charge of the Three Excellencies, the top 3 ranking official roles within the government. His new title gave him control of civil and military, internal and external affairs, with the duties of pacifying the empire, respecting his lord's imperial orders, and also upholding moral values and discipline within the state's armies and courts. Late in the year 241, Sun Quan's eldest son, Sun Deng, died. This marked the start of a decline in Sun Quan's mental health, as his actions became very questionable from this point on. He appointed his third son, Sun He, as the next crown prince, but also at the same time allowed his fourth son to have the same staffing level as his brother. This was clearly going to set them up to compete with one another further down the line, but Sun Quan did not listen to Lu Xun or any of the other advisors who tried to enlighten him of this. Perhaps this is what Sun Quan intended, as a test of sorts between the two brothers. Lu Xun was correct in his fear that the brothers' new open positions of power would be swarmed upon by corrupt, incompetent ministers seeking to further their own ambitions, not to benefit the state. One such individual was Chuan Kong's son, Chuan Ji, who favoured Sun Ba. Lu Xun wrote to Chuan Kong to try to talk to him about his son's ambitions, but it just led to a strained relationship between the two. As time went on, the rivalry between the two brothers worsened, and as Sun He's rightful title of Crown Prince was slipping away, he also fell out of favour with his father, so Lu Xun spoke up in his defence. He stated that as Sun He is the legitimate heir apparent, he should have a foundation as solid as a rock, while Sun Ba is merely a vassal and should receive less favours than the Crown Prince. He insisted that he would kowtow, which is the act of kneeling down to the point of your head touching the floor, until his head bleeds, unless Sun Quan reconsiders this carefully. Numerous letters were sent by Lu Xun, and he even asked permission to leave his post to come talk in person about the matter, but Sun Quan denied his request. Sun Quan's frustration towards Lu Xun drove him to send 3 of Lu Xun's maternal nephews into exile, whilst he also executed Wu Can, Sun He's tutor, as he had been exchanging letters with Lu Xun. After receiving numerous reprimands and accusations from the imperial court for interfering with the succession, Lu Xun passed away at the age of 62 in the year 245 in much anger and frustration. In his old age, Lu Xun was very careful with his money and so left very little behind for his family. Lu Kang took his father's coffin from Wuchang to Wu Commandery to be buried, but he stopped off to visit Sun Quan at Jianyi to pay his respects beforehand. Sun Quan and a panel of officials interrogated Lu Kang intensely about his father's interference with the succession, but Lu Kang kept his calm and answered honestly, which led to Sun Quan's anger towards him and his father subsiding. Sun Quan's succession problem was resolved 5 years later, when he deposed of Sun He and forced Sun Ba to kill himself. He then appointed his youngest son, Sun Liang, as the new heir apparent. Things ended badly for pretty much everyone in partner with either Sun He or Sun Ba, as many of them were executed. A year later, in 251, as Sun Quan could feel his time was coming to an end, he heard that Lu Kang was about to leave the city after recently recovering from an illness, so Sun Quan went to meet him before he departed. Sun Quan arrived with tears in his eyes and said, "Previously, I believed slanderous rumours and failed to understand your father's well-meaning advice. I have let you down. I have burnt all the documents containing the allegations against your father so that nobody can ever see them." If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Late in the year 241, Sun Quan's eldest son, Sun Deng, died.